Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. Our guest today is Robert Strayer. He's the U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Cyber Policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
The U.S. has said it has essentially four strategic rivals, adversaries in cyberspace: Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. I want to focus, first of all, on China. You and others in the Trump administration have been pressuring your European allies to ban the use of technology owned by Huawei, the now infamous Chinese company, because you believe this is a threat to U.S. and European national security. Mm-hmm. How much of a success are you having with the Europeans? I know that some decisions are going to be made very soon.
So a year ago, almost no one was talking about the importance of looking at supply chain security in the vendors that are going to provide these very important networks for our future, because those networks are going to be providing telemedicine, guiding autonomous vehicles, and operating automated manufacturing plants. We've now seen the European Union in October develop a risk assessment that highlights many of the concerns that we've been sharing with our European partners. And those include that there's a larger cyber attack surface area when 5G technology is deployed because there'll be so much more software driving those systems. And it then recognizes that a nation state could cause an update to that software in that operating system to be compromised in the future, disabling that critical infrastructure that's riding on the networks, or obtaining our very sensitive personal data or key economic data. So the European Union recognizing that, as well as saying there should be a risk profile that identifies the ownership structure, as well as laws that could allow a government outside a country, that is in a third country, an authoritarian country like China, to take control of that company and guide its activities. So we see the national intelligence law in China as the conduit through which the Chinese Communist Party can command Huawei or another company to take action that's not in anyone's interests.
So what do you want from the Europeans? To ban the use of Huawei technology totally?
What we want is, and we know that each country is going to make their own sovereign decisions, we want them to implement a set of security measures that look at the law where the company is headquartered, to see whether there are checks and balances on the government's control over the private sector in the country where those vendors are located.
That's not the case for China, obviously.
That's not the case because this is a national intelligence law that
But they say it's a private company. Huawei says that we're an absolutely private company. Those are unfounded accusations.
And we think but we say that is a check they can't cash. When they say they won't respond to the government, they have no way to go to an independent judiciary that we can, in any Western country, and object to the commands of the state. There is no rule of law for them to point to and say, we will not adhere to the commands of the Chinese Communist Party. So they will do exactly what the intelligence and security services want in China when it's at their advantage to do so.
The UK obviously is not going to be part of the EU. There are decisions coming up. Are you confident that your closest ally, if I may use that expression, will follow your recommendations?
We're having ongoing active discussions with them. We point out to them that, as they've said publicly, that there are hundreds of vulnerabilities in Huawei's software and hardware that they've already found themselves. And there is no way to effectively test your way in the future into security. So you can't keep analyzing this equipment because fundamentally with regard to this type of technology, it can be updated instantaneously with millions of lines of code. Any which of those lines of code contain vulnerability that could be exploited. So we are sharing with the UK that we're very concerned about any effort to try to just test and look at the equipment. And we think there's no part of the network, not having just a control over what's called the core and not the edge from a security perspective, we would say is completely inadequate because the edge as well.
That's what they've been doing.
Right. Well, they've been testing all of it, but there's some word that they might use, allow Huawei into non-sensitive parts of their network. The non-sensitive parts would be they consider it to be the edge, but the edge of the networks of the future will be where our smart vehicles will be going, where our smart grid will be connected, and where there will be automated manufacturing. We do not want an adversary nation to have control over the vendor for that critical technology in any part of our network, any part where there's smart computing going on. And that will be absolutely the case in 5G as it's rolled out in those very important use cases.
Isn't this because the US is very late with the 5G technology, behind Huawei, obviously, but even some European tech giants?
Well, first of all, there's a number of U.S. technology companies playing parts in 5G. Cisco, Qualcomm, they're designing the underlying chips, underlying networking gear. Now, when it comes to the radio access network companies, there are really 5 of those in the world. 2 of them are European. Another one is South Korean in the form of Samsung, and 2 are Chinese.
No Americans.
No, none of them are Americans.
So isn't this the reason for your campaign?
Well, no, it's just quite the opposite. There's no benefit to the United States in this. This is purely a security argument. So we are fundamentally concerned only about the security, not about helping out any particular company. But I would just add that in the United States, we're using Ericsson, Nokia, and Samsung to build our 5G networks. We in South Korea are leading the world in the deployment of 5G networks. So we don't need to slow anyone down. We're already doing well in this race.
I want to get to Iran. Obviously, there were very serious events in Iraq recently. Have you seen any evidence of cyber retaliation by Iran against U.S. interests around the world?
Well, I can't comment on what we know from a classified basis about activities related to Iran. I will say that we know that Iran is a malicious actor acting in ways that cause disinformation as well as attacking critical infrastructure in the past. So we've urged our private sector and urged companies around the world to be vigilant with regard to potential attacks from Iran on their critical infrastructure.
But have there been attacks since the killing of...
Unfortunately, I can't comment on any classified intelligence. The nature of cyber is that we are very careful about the way that we would make any type of public attribution about activities that we see online, being sure that we know who the actors were, what territory they emanated from, and what the means that they were using to do so.
Russia, obviously, there's been a lot of discussion, more than that, in the U.S. about the hacking of the 2016 elections, reports that it's still ongoing. It might still happen for the forthcoming election, and that the Trump administration is not really going after Russia for its past and current activities in cyberspace.
We've definitely been taking them on. First of all, let me just say that it's important to note that we recognize, as we have through many intelligence public reporting that we've done, that our adversaries and competitors in cyberspace are going to use cyber as a means to achieve their political, military, and economic goals. And when it comes to political, we know that they can use disinformation, ways that they can hide their hand and try to influence our political system. And we've been very clear with Russia that interference with our electoral infrastructure or influence campaigns in the United States seeking to alter the outcomes of our elections are unacceptable and will be met with serious consequences.
Is this happening? The primaries are just around the corner.
Well, again, I'm not going to talk about what we know from a classified basis. I will tell you that we've let Russia know exactly what they should not be doing with regard to our elections.
Right. Speaking of Russia, there was a report in the New York Times saying that probably people identified either as Russians or maybe Russian government supported, have been waging a kind of disinformation campaign in several Latin American countries, Chile, Bolivia, Ecuador, especially countries that have been against the regime of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, and that the State Department actually picked up on this kind of disinformation campaign. Can you tell us more about Russia's role in this region, but maybe in other areas of the world?
Well, we know that Russia, through cutouts and other conduits, seeks to use the digital means to alter public opinion in places around the world. We work closely with platform companies to try to take actions to remediate against those malicious actors online.
Right. I just want to get quickly to the issue of digital taxation. This has been a bone of contention between the U.S. and Europe, between the U.S. And France. There seems to be a possibility of a compromise. Presidents Emmanuel Macron of France and Donald Trump had a phone call, and the French have said they would not slap their own digital taxation on U.S. tech giants, and that there's maybe room for a compromise. Are you optimistic there'll be one between the U.S. and France, and more broadly between the U.S. and Europe?
Yeah, I'm optimistic that we'll be able to work something out. As you noted, President Trump and President Macron have spoke. There will be continued high-level dialogue about this. We're also optimistic that the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, here, based in Paris, is going to be a forum where we can have productive policy guidance about how we can move forward in the future.
So you're confident because obviously the fact that some countries like France or even the UK or Spain have begun to have their own taxation, that there'll be a kind of format the OECD where this will be the framework for a taxation, because some people in Europe argue that there needs to be fair taxation of those tech giants that are taking advantage of tax havens or tax advantages around the world.
Well, it's a little more, I think, complex than to characterize our companies as somehow taking advantage of a global system. But we should all recognize that there's changes in the way commerce is evolving, and there needs to be changes in tax policy. And I think there will be productive outcomes in the end. But fundamentally, the United States is not going to sit by if our tech companies are being unfairly discriminated against by a nation's law. So we will raise that to a higher level of discussion as we seek to work out something for the future.
So you're confident that there'll be a compromise on this issue very soon?
Yes.
Okay, Robert Stair, thank you very much for coming on the France 24 set, and thank you for watching this interview. Stay tuned for more news.
In India, the Citizenship Amendment Act is a new law that makes access to citizenship easier for refugees persecuted for their religion. As a secular state, the country is facing rising anger and widespread demonstrations. Muslims are clearly being targeted and are excluded from the measure.
It's so close to the graded citizenship that we saw that happened in Germany.
Is anti-constitutional. We will show that we are not afraid of you.
As all eyes turn to the Indian Supreme Court, the future for all Muslim citizens is more uncertain than ever.
Reporters presented by Mark Owen on France 24 and France24.com.